From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
It is my good pleasure to introduce Mary Kay Zuravleff, an award-winning local writer. However, if she had followed family tradition, her father and her brother are engineers, she might have spent her life in that field. But after earning degrees in English and mathematics at Rice University, she entered the creative writing program at Johns Hopkins University rather than a school of engineering. Her first novel, The Frequency of Souls, was published in 1996. The Chicago Tribune described it as beguiling and wildly inventive, a funny and wholly original love story that weds the everyday to the supernatural. A second novel, The Bowl is Already Broken, is set in Washington, D.C., and perhaps at one of the institutions here on the Mall. At any rate, it's lively and instructive, and the book introduces the reader to the museum community. I might add that Ms. Zuravleff worked for the Smithsonian Institution as a writer-editor for a number of years. Her latest book, Man Alive, the one she'll read from today, deals with a family in crisis. Reviewers describe it as witty and engaging, vividly alive and breathing, and as a novel that chronicles the tensions and resentments that pull a family apart in the wake of a freak accident. Our author has received the American Academy Rosenthal Award, the James Jones First Novel Award, and she has been a 5-time winner of a DC Commission on the Arts and Humanities Artist Fellowship. She serves on the board of the Faulkner Foundation, is a co-founder of the DC Women Writers, and she and her husband Gary are the parents of 2 delightful children. Now, just a reminder, this event is being videotaped for subsequent broadcasting on the library's website and in other media. You are encouraged to take part in the question and answer period, but please know that your voice and your image may be recorded and later broadcast as part of this event. By participating in the question and answer period, you're consenting to the library's possible reproduction and transmission of your remarks. Now, please join me in welcoming Mary Kay to the podium.
That was wonderful. Thank you for that introduction. I am delighted to be here. And for those of you who don't think that lightning can strike twice, Jamaica Kincaid could not be here today, and that brought me. I'm sorry that she can't be here. I'll do my best. I'll answer. When we do questions and answers, I'll talk about her fiction if you want. Happy to do that. And secondly, Albert Goldbarth, who just read, I don't know if you saw, but he had a lightning strike on his tie. So obviously, I was meant to be here. This book is about a pediatric psychiatrist, actually a psychopharmacologist, who is struck by lightning the last night of the family vacation in Rehoboth. He's putting a quarter in a parking meter, and he is blown away. And he survives, but he's a little bit charmed by what happened to him. It's a bit of an ecstatic experience, in his opinion, and he's not so eager to return to normal. Meanwhile, his family is very eager for that, and he has been treating children for years with ADHD and post-traumatic stress and all sorts of issues that have to do with sort of electrical storms in the brain. And now it's personal. He's going through exactly the same symptoms that he's been treating. So because I just got dropped in to this wonderful festival, I'm just going to drop you right in to this book. And his name is Owen Lerner. His wife's name is Tony. They have twin sons in college and a teenage daughter who's still at home. She's a gymnast. Her name is Brooke. Some people who get struck by lightning get what are called lightning flowers or Lichtenberg figures, and it looks like lightning. It's basically a flash, almost like how a photocopy machine works, of the lightning. brings the capillaries to view, and it looks like lightning, and it can be down their back, it can be down there. He had it down his arms, and they fade very quickly. It's almost like a sunburn. But he loved his, and he did not want them to fade. So this is a couple months after his episode, and he's returned to the office a little bit, and his wife is now home from work at the end of a long day. She is a headhunter for college presidents. Okay, that's enough, so let's just start. Her name is Tony. The Zinfandel that Tony's pouring may have been intended to complement, oh, there is one more thing you must know. After his lightning strike, he is obsessed with barbecue. How could I not tell you that? So he has been putting all of his efforts into meat, essentially. The Zinfandel that Tony's pouring may have been intended to complement a rasher of ribs, perhaps from the half a cow wrapped in individual body parts in their freezer. She would have cleared her choice with Owen if he were home, but he must be pressing his nose against a meat locker somewhere. Tony sinks into the sofa and lifts her feet onto the ottoman. It's not necessary for her to drink this wine down like water, except that she just might. Here's to last week while she's at it. Her job is more solid than ever. In addition to the retiring presidents are the ones who self-destruct or can't withstand the latest financial pressure. Some are such martyrs, acting as if they're running their campuses on 5 loaves of bread and 2 fishes. Walk it off, she was tempted to tell Cornell's president, pouting about his $6 billion endowment. Instead, she pointed out that Afghanistan's GNP was around $6 billion, and she left it at that. The trick is to use her attitude sparingly, lest people think she's flip. That's what Owen said when she accused him of throwing his practice over for a pork shoulder. Or maybe he called her glib. She's pragmatic. Someone in the family has to be. In fact, she and Owen had finally managed to have a conversation about his being both who he wants to be and who they need him to be. That strikes her as fair. A person should be able to change within reason, within the confines of his commitments. A certain amount of push and pull goes on in a family, allowing for shifts or subtle changes of direction, but ultimately keeping each member inside the family's embrace. Tony's ankles atop the ottoman are a stranger's ankles. They're puffy, and her swollen feet bear the imprint of her shoes. The hem of her skirt reveals a few inches of thigh, and she pushes her thumb along the spiderwebby veins that ruin her for shorts. Where she crosses her legs, a dozen parallel threads of purple and red stripe her skin. They disappear when she presses on them. If she were one for plastic surgery, she'd be tempted to get them zapped or stripped, though she's sure she wouldn't be willing to spend whatever they charge. What might they charge? Her legs have always been one of her better features as opposed to her midsection. Although she's actually lost weight, she imagines tugging her skirt zipper down a few inches and watching her body gush out into a fleshy puddle. Things are slip-sliding away. Her waist, her bladder. Sometimes she has to cross her legs before she sneezes. Lately, the shine seems to have slipped right off her hair. A key turns in the front door just then, and Tony relaxes more deeply now that she knows where Owen is. Starting on essentially level ground, they've made the most conventional of all climbs together. Marriage, a house, more education, children. She thinks about couples who choose each other despite depression and drinking problems. For heaven's sakes, prisoners on death row get married. She wonders how many couples actually have a contingency plan for a setback as rare as theirs. Something crappy and unexpected eventually happens to everyone, doesn't it? For years, the phrase family planning, meaning when and how many times to get pregnant, made Tony think of all the planning required to get 3 kids dressed, fed, and off to school daily with proper backpack fodder, permission slips, sports gear, homework, lunches, add in flu season, cupcakes, her and Owen's jobs, extend indefinitely getting them to sports, music camp, college. What is taking Owen so long? As for her puddling body, she could get back on track with that now that she doesn't have to be his nurse. Near the metro, there are gyms on both sides of the street, rows of stationary bicyclists, barely visible, behind windows they've fogged. Tony hears Owen's distinctive shuffle. "I'm in here," she calls out. "Honey?" She swings her feet off the ottoman and, buttoning her waistband, pads toward the entry hall. to see Owen scurry like a crab onto the landing and then sidle upstairs, remarkably fast for him. Did he hear her? He seemed more lopsided than usual, and Tony worries that he is in a pain that he doesn't want to admit. Owen, are you all right? Fine, he barks. You don't need to come up here. If that isn't an invitation, she doesn't know what is. Are you hungry? I got a pizza. Thanks anyway. Did he actually remember that Brooke is at gymnastics until after 8? Tony was thinking they'd have a simple grilled fish for dinner, and she had stopped by the fish store. The slab of tuna she bought should be gold-leafed for what they charge. She climbs a half-dozen steps, thinks better of it, and returns to the landing. This is ridiculous. He's probably relishing a moment alone in his own bedroom, just as she was winding down after work. He's been so closely watched. On the other hand, where the hell has he been all afternoon? And why did he run past her without a word? With the kids, she tried to position herself midway between the poles of hovering and neglect, though it sometimes felt as if she were simply running to one pole, tagging it, and then running to the other. Owen is not her child. He is not a child. Tony steps off the landing and walks back toward the couch until another equally valid line of logic loops through her brain. She would be irresponsible to ignore all the doctor's warnings of erratic behavior, especially considering Owen's erratic behavior. What's the proper response to, "You don't need to come up here"? Tiptoe, she decides. Tony makes her way upstairs, and it's habit rather than stealth that has her avoiding the creaky spots. However, when she faces their closed bedroom door, she has to decide whether to announce herself or not. In the end, knocking on their door seems more suspicious than respectful, and so she simply turns the knob. "No!" Owen barks when the door swings open. He's standing in front of the dresser mirror, and for a man taken by surprise, he moves gracefully, twisting around to grab the corner of the quilt. He's stronger than she would have thought. He lifts the heavy coverlet clean off the bed, swirling the ersatz robe to settle around his shoulders. Despite Tony's certainty of bad juju, Owen strikes a regal pose there in his long hair and leggings, his gloved hand clutching the edges of the mantelace beneath his neck, the white quilt pooling on the bedroom floor into a kingly train. He is shirtless beneath the makeshift robe, and a flapping bandage runs the length of his right arm from clavicle to the edge of his burn glove, and he stares at her defiantly. "I said I didn't need you." What he'd said, what she'd puzzled over was, "You don't need to come up here." That's different from "I don't need you," and far less hurtful. Tony sits down heavily on the bed, queasy inevitability now crawling up her legs like the spider up the water spout. Eye level with the dresser top, she sees snapshots fanned out by the jewelry box, and she recognizes the pictures the boys took the first few days, those ghost images of electricity that flitted through his blood vessels. She remembers the Sharpie that Owen turned on himself after the marks had faded. If he had cancer, she would be right there next to him. If he'd been accused of malpractice, if he had early Alzheimer's. "You're still sick," she says. "You've got a long way to go." "Don't talk to me like that." "Why not?" she asks. "I have done a remarkable job. So many people have told me of taking everything in stride. Let him heal. Let his healing take its own course. That has been my approach. Why are you making this so hard?" "Because it is hard," he says. He's angry at his wife, who never got it to begin with. Jokes, love, faith. If you have to explain them, they evanesce, and yet each has the potential to be a shared experience with the right person. If Tony had been to the mountaintop, he would try to meet her there. "Why can't you be happy for me?" he asks. He's speaking from a deep well of confusion, for the tattoo that was meant to commemorate his glorious bolt of enlightenment has partially reconstituted. "I have been everything for you," Tony says, but there is a speck of truth in his accusation. She has not ever, starting the instant he was struck, been happy for him. He holds the quilt edges together in one fist so he can thump on his chest with the other. "No one knows what it's like in here," he says. Toni moans as if her jaw were wired shut. 6 months, she tells herself, 6 months to get back on track. She's been at it nearly 3. Frankly, she isn't sure she has 3 more in her. His pronouncement that no one knows him seems especially absurd considering his profession. After all, he presumes to know for each patient what it's like in there. She is as desperate to slip the quilt from his shoulder as she is not to see beneath those bandages. She tries to reconstitute compassion any way she can, but honestly, even as they'd been having actual conversations this morning, he had been planning this, unless he walked into a tattoo parlor this afternoon on a whim. Ultimately, Toni points her long, accusatory finger at his shoulder. Speaking through clenched teeth, she asks, "Did they use sterile needles? Or do we have to worry about hepatitis now, too?" Owen lets the quilt crumple to the bed, and he lifts the flap of bandage from his shoulder as if he were stretching out a wing. At the sight of his tattoo, Toni feels sick with hopelessness. 10 minutes earlier, she had just been hating the spiderweb veins on her legs and weighing the cost of having them removed. These thin red welts look as if her legs had run down his arms. From his right forearm, past the crook of his elbow, and all the way up past his shoulder to his wrecked clavicle, he is inked with the veins and twiggy capillaries that truck his blood around his body. Through his puffy skin, Toni sees the horrible artistry of the tattooist, whose work is as accurate as a medical illustration. There are the red branching lightning flowers, souvenir of his strike, which electricity first made visible and are now indelible. Toni wants to reject what she has seen. Failing that, she tries to rationalize. Might getting this tattoo be part of his cure? But staring at her husband's arm, all she can come up with is an elephant joke. What's gray on the inside and red on the outside? An inside-out elephant. She isn't sure she's prepared to live with an inside-out Owen. Hurt and hysteria have her gulping air like a fish. "To me, you couldn't even mention this?" "You would have stopped me." She's crying now that he's made it permanent. He's paid someone to etch him with a map, a target, which seems heartbreakingly apt. "What have I ever stopped you from doing?" she moans. "What power have I ever had? This has nothing to do with you," Owen says. She stops holding on to herself. She is so stunned by his bluntness. What the hell did he see in that flash that outshines the life they have built together brick by brick? Toni covers her face with her hands and throws herself on the bed. His capacity to hurt her knows no bounds. She is as angry as she is envious. What a privilege to do whatever you want. When she had looked at her legs, she couldn't even bring herself to imagine paying someone to erase the veins. Meanwhile, a bright light and a blow to the head could be just the correction a person needed to get out of a rut. That's how she might see it if she wasn't the rut. Muffled by the pillows, Toni howls, "You don't even want to get better." Owen fans out his gloved hand and he works the hinge of his wrist, still slightly tender from being thrown to the sidewalk. "I am better," he says quietly. "I'm not the same, if that's what you mean." It seems to him that if he's been one person for 50 plus years, and now he's a different person, that's his prerogative. She acts as if his changing might make her disappear, but he is who he is. He's comfortable with that. And now he's been bumped up a bit. He wants to borrow the language of plastic surgeons, breast augmentation, figure enhancement. You only better. How can he remain in light? He can't even explain the message of the flash without alienating people. The energy, the heat did a number on him. However, his enlightenment doesn't negate who he had been. And it certainly doesn't cast Toni into shadow. But his one and only wife is suffering. "Toni, sweetheart," Owen says, "what's the most profound experience you have ever had?" She sits up to blow her nose, but she will not look him in the eye. Damn if she is going to say it was his rescue. He waits, as if he really wants to know, as if she were his patient. And finally she says, childbirth. Well, not the first time. That was an ordeal. Because the twins' entrance was so chaotic, the university hospital room downright crowded, and she and the babies hooked up to every conceivable monitor, she hadn't been prepared for the intimacy of birth. But she had ushered her daughter into the world nearly by herself. Nothing she'd been through before or since holds a candle to that. He says, "You were crazy in love. You were blindsided. You don't know the half of it," she thinks, wondering how many bridges one to another people can build. Despite herself, she has the first inkling into Owen's vision. Alongside the unthinkable pain and weirdness of childbirth, in which her own body opened itself from the inside, before she blinked the tears from her eyes or the nurse had fully wiped her newborn clean, Toni knew a love like no other. It seemed that Brooke was love, and a product of love, and the embodiment of goodness that Toni had both sprouted from within and been implanted with, a love that had fed on her and grown so large it was only natural to burst forth into the world, helpless and mewling, but nonetheless complete, still dependent, but also independent, able to stretch her own nostrils and take in the smell of Toni's skin and breath, pucker her lips, and taste milk Toni was already making for her. Eventually, a half pint gushing into each breast and leaving permanent marks at the simple request, stretching at the simple request of Brooke's cry, so they could link their bodies together in a new way that showed their attachment and devotion to each other. Brooke is something like Toni's living tattoo, herself turned inside out and visible to the rest of the world. Of course, her sweet teenager is far more than symbol, far more than inked homunculus, than inscribed stain. But she is evidence to Toni of a joyous mystery and of past lives and of lives to come. Had Owen glimpsed all that in the blaze that jetted him into the air and then dropped him on the sidewalk, melted to his shoes? Will he ever get over such rapture? Will they lose him in his attempt to sustain it? Thank you. Thank you. So here's hoping that lightning does not fall down from that sky while you are all enjoying literature this afternoon. I would be happy to take questions or talk about Jamaica Kincaid or answer anything. Probably half the people in the audience are writers as well as readers. I'd be happy to talk about where the book came from or anything you want. Other books I've written. Electricity, I like to talk about electricity. Where did the book come from? So Oliver Sacks wrote an article about a doctor who was struck by lightning. It was in the New Yorker. And that doctor heard piano music. People are nodding their heads. So they heard this. It was a beautiful article. And this particular surgeon heard piano music. And so he had to learn how to play the piano, which he knew slightly, learn how to compose, and learn how to actually get down on paper what he had been hearing in his head, which is actually kind of a lot like writing. You're sort of trying to get in words that music that goes through your head. But I was just kind of playing as I do with yarn and words. And I just closed the magazine and I thought, yeah, a pediatric psychopharmacologist gets hit by lightning and all he wants to do is barbecue. Ha, ha, ha. So I just started playing with that. And then when I, in doing research to match the book, when I realized that that kind of injury, in fact, puts him exactly what he has been treating, then I knew I had a novel going. Some things you pick and some things come to you. Yes? You need a microphone. And there's one right there. Right there, yeah. Speak to all of us.
It seems a little strange that
Close.
the wife would come into the house and see sections of a cow, in the freezer, pieces of it in the refrigerator, and, not react.
Well, you're 180 pages into the book here.
Got you.
So she's
Okay.
coming home from work and she's thinking, oh, he probably is saving this wine for some of the stuff that's in the freezer. So that's
Gotcha.
been going on. He's dug a barbecue pit in the backyard.
So she's completely inured to this at that point? That it's
No,
No.
she's not inured to it.
okay, but not surprised.
She's home after a long
Okay.
day at work, and she's putting her feet up. And
And-
they've had a nice morning. What you didn't hear, they've had a nice morning. They've had the first sort of inkling that he's in there. And so she's ready oh, he's home. She's ready to continue what they've had that morning,
Right.
thinking that maybe he's on his way back to her. But he's
And-
spent the day elsewhere.
And grab the Zinfandel and forget the beef.
Yeah, just have a
Okay.
drink of wine, and Owen will come home and we'll grill some tuna. And we'll have
Gotcha.
dinner. I mean, that's the evening she has scripted
Okay.
for them.
Okay.
The book is told in what I'm calling family point of view, and you're in each character's head and nobody else's. There's no overarching narrative. And it's done that way because we are each of us telling ourselves a story, and we're not sharing it that much one to
Okay.
another. I mean, within the family, we have our own story going, and we are consistently astonished by the story that's playing in the head next to us. And so she is, in fact, astonished again and again.
Okay. But she brings tuna. She brings tuna for dinner.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Other nights they have buffalo. Yeah, I've had some wonderful and fun book parties, and everybody served barbecue. It's like, brilliant, brilliant. Next book, chocolate, you know? Didn't know I was planting that idea in people's heads, but I'm very happy to eat barbecue. You're content to be read to this afternoon, huh?
I have a question.
Oh, wonderful.
Is it hard to give names to your characters? And do you go through a long process, or does it depend?
It changes a lot. And as you're doing it, then you pick up a book, and darn if the exact name that you finally settled on isn't the main character of the next book you pick up. That happens all the time. And my daughter helped me a lot. We were sort of kicking around names for the main character. It took a while to get Owen Lerner for him. And Tony was always Tony. I mean, my first novel, I had been working on it, and then when the main character's name, Niagara, came to me, the novel took off. So it is important what names you pick. It doesn't seem so big a deal, but in fact, they kind of inform you in different ways. And you know, one of the identical twins they call him Ricky, and when he goes back to college, he begins to assume the name Richard. And for him, that is a big step. And you know, a little skip like that, somebody you've known as Betsy for years reappears in your life as Elizabeth. And in her mind, she has changed, right, her persona. So names are important. It's kind of fun to assign them to your people. I wrote this book in present tense, which is odd for me. I've never written anything in present tense. I don't encourage my students to write in present tense. But I did it for a lot of reasons. Well, first I wrote it in past tense. Then I had to rewrite the whole book in present tense. And somebody at a writer's colony was talking about what is the grammatical, this is just the group to ask this question, what is the grammatical term for the shift that we make when we tell stories? So you say, I went to the store the other day and I had to get tomato juice. And then I'm in the store and this guy says to me, people do this all the time, right? So you start in past and then you, and I'm saying to him, don't touch that. And I've never seen that written up anywhere. Probably one of you has written a paper on it. You know? Maybe the historical present? Can I have a thumbs up for the historical present? Well, it's fascinating because after that person said that to me, you know, I thought a lot. You hear it everywhere, and so it's something that comes natural to people. So the book was written in past tense, and when I reread it, thinking I was almost done, there was a distance to it. There's a line at the very beginning where he cannot know he is being struck by lightning. I wanted you in the fire with him. And to have it be past tense, he couldn't know he was being struck by lightning. It had this safety to it. But there is no safety for this family. They are in deep trouble. And every one of them is being struck by lightning on every page. And so it had to be present tense. I'd never done that before. And so that's an interesting technical tidbit that I learned myself as I wrote this book. That's an answer to a question nobody asked. Sure. What research did I do about people getting struck by lightning? God bless the internet. I wrote my second novel is about an Asian art museum somewhere on the National Mall. And it's called the National Museum of Asian Art, so that you're not confused by this American collection that's in it. But we can talk about that later. So that book, the internet wasn't so up and running. And I had to read and read and read to get the details that a novelist needs. Because you don't just open a book on Islamic art and learn that it takes the chin hairs of a squirrel or the whiskers of a kitten for the brush to make the Persian miniatures. That's not in the survey on Islamic art. You got to keep going and keep going and keep going. But if you're writing a book on lightning and you ask Google, what does flesh smell like when it, is hits by lightning, or how bad can it be, and you can ask any specific question about barbecue, about healing, about burns, and boy, can you find it. And especially people who are suffering, and especially something as baffling as the electricity that runs through our heads and our veins and our heart. A lot of people sustain lifelong pain if they are struck by lightning. And so they're comparing notes, left and right. And so you can really read about that on the internet, and that was very helpful. So I didn't start out knowing much about it, and I still don't know that much about it. I know to come in when it looks bad out there. I grew up in Oklahoma, which has legendary storms, just outrageous storms. So when the sky is green, I know where to go. And I needed research that fed the book. So I would go for really specific details, and you can find them. Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
The microphone and everything.
I have a few questions. One, did you read Gretel Ehrlich's book about...
I haven't. I need to, don't I?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Greta Ehrlich is a novelist who was struck by lightning, and she wrote a nonfiction book about her experience, which was quite not just profound but devastating. This is what I know about it, and you've actually read it.
Yes.
I'm just
Yeah.
riffing here, and many people have said you need to read that. You need to read that, and because it sounded like it had this overarching sadness to it, I haven't quite read it yet because I was going toward a more religious experience, but I do need to read it.
Read her next book first, then the first book
Okay.
won't be so bad.
Okay.
When you were writing, were there plot twists that came as you were writing that you didn't expect? And were there plot twists that came that you didn't expect that you rejected, and why did you reject them?
Well, that's a great question. I like the second question more because, were there plot twists that came I didn't expect? Yes, because I don't really know where I'm going. So is that a twist? It's basically like a revelation. And did I reject some of those revelations? Calibration of a novel is very important. So it's almost a comic premise, except that he's so badly hurt. But to say, ha, doctor gets hit by lightning, wants to barbecue, it's almost funny. But it's not a comic novel. I'm deeply devoted to this family, and the visual metaphor I have is of the balls on a pool table, and the lightning strikes them as if it were the cue, and they are just flung, and as if they are all struck. And so, how bad is it for each of them? Where do they go, and what do they do? And as I would fashion that and take them into these really dark corridors, then I would have to figure out if that was too dark, and could they recover, and could they not recover, and if they go there, what happens to the rest of the crew? How much do we follow? Some people say like a mother is only as happy as her least happy child, and a child really, really in trouble, that all the energy, all the blood in the body has to go to that child. So what could happen to each of them that is both plausible, awful, but not so awful? Many, many crappy things happen in families, and many people endure them, and many people recover from them and regroup and rebond. And family is an organism, and it can fall apart and it can come back together. So there were a lot of plot twists that I would sort of go down a road, and then that would lead me to better roads, or I would go down a road and think, whoa, back it up, back it up, back it up. Happened all the time. That's a good question. And I have all these visualizations, all these graphs and pictures of where I was going that I keep track of. Uh-oh, I can't hear you, so really yell it. Say that one more time. Well, is my book a mystery? Oh, I don't want to tell you what happens. Yeah, I want to leave that a mystery. I thought she was asking if I write mysteries, and my new answer to that is yes. Do you write romance? Oh, yes. Is it a thriller? Uh-huh, uh-huh. So I've taken to embracing, instead of making literary fiction smaller, I've taken to, what did Walt Whitman say? I encompass all. Yes. When was I able to see these characters? I always feel that as I'm inventing them, when something that is completely antithetical to what I've invented pops into the narrative or my head, and yet it makes sense, because what happens when you start is you think it all is of a piece and it's so logical. We are so logical, and we're not. We are this smorgasbord of non-interconnected and connected, what's the word I want? We constantly correct ourselves. And so, you have, the example I always use is, the cobbler whose children's shoes are a wreck. I mean, that's a very common trope, but it's also true. The accountant that you rely on, if you saw his car, you'd think, oh my God, he's keeping my figures straight. There's bags in the car and cat food scattered. And yet, on another level, it makes perfect sense. So when I'm creating a character and then I get that dissonance that actually fits, then they have more dimensions, as we all do. How about one more question that someone has just been waiting to ask? Somebody, oh, hi, Terry.
How long did it take you to write
This one was a breeze. This was about 4 years, and that's nothing compared to the other two. So I'm getting faster. My second novel, I made the main character 43, and I was 35 at the time, and then I lapped her. I was like, ooh, that's a bad idea. So someone said, why don't you make the main character just a touch older than yourself, and maybe you'll meet her at least halfway. But this was a much more straightforward book. I mean, as soon as I knew that I had my 5 people, and it was all about them. With the last book, I had to talk about the history of Asian art, every country in Asia. I had to take some people to Asia where I'd never been. So for this book, we're in Bethesda and Rehoboth, and they are suffering, and it was just much more contained. And I had to rewrite it a bunch, but not so much. There's a great Annie Dillard line. This is a good place to close. Annie Dillard says, it takes 5 to 10 years to write a novel. Some people can do it in a year, but some people can lift cars, and some people can eat cars, and there's no reason to consider that normal. Thank you very, very much. Thank you for having me.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.